Dad was a U-2 pilot flying a CIA U-2 spy plane in the 1950s. They were photographing over the Soviet Union, China, India, Pakistan, Eastern Bloc countries, as well as the Middle East, trying to gain information on the strengths and weaknesses of our adversaries. So after 5 years of successful flights in the U-2, on May 1st of 1960, my father was shot down over the former Soviet Union. He was caught, captured, tried for espionage, sentenced to 10 years in prison in the Soviet Union, served a total of 21 months of captivity before being exchanged for Soviet spy Colonel Rudolf Abel at the Glenicker Bridge in Potsdam, Germany.
And there was a time, this period of your father's capture and his trial, a very public Soviet showpiece, when Khrushchev and the world were just talking about one incident and one man. Would it be fair to say that Gary Powers, for a while, was the man of the moment?
That is correct. Between about May 7th of 1960, when international headlines appeared about the U-2 shootdown and my father being caught and captured, up through the mid-60s, after his release and exchange on the Glenicker Bridge, it was front-page news every day, every week. There was some story or article about my father. Some true, some not true.
Well, when you see the photographs and the footage of him on trial, because my memory, and I'm working from memory here, it was all filmed and broadcast, wasn't it? I mean, that must be quite emotional to watch.
Well, it was filmed and broadcast, but it's not emotional for me. I am, I've seen it for the most of my adult life now, and I've done research extensively for the last 25 years on the Cold War and the U-2 incident. So for me to look at these archival films and the things on the internet through YouTube and other sources I've been able to find, it's more of an adventure for me to continue to find things I don't know about than it is an emotional roller coaster ride.
For your father, though, you've come up with this this new publication, which is Letters from a Soviet Prison, the personal journal and correspondence of Francis Gary Powers. This was a horrid time in your father's life. To tell us a little bit about what you discovered here, about the letters which are featured in this book.
Well, fortunately, my father and then my mother, after his death, kept all of the letters that he wrote from prison to his loved ones, his family, and those he received from family. So over the last 20 years, I have entered these letters into my computer system and finally thought that I'd found everyone I could possibly find and had the book published in May of this year. It is composed of the letters that my father wrote to and from prison and his journal that he kept in prison. And the reason I decided to do this, I felt that after all these years, 55 plus years now, all the misinformation is still out there. And I felt that by having Dad's written word, what he wrote and thought in prison, would be the definitive, authoritative account of what took place with him and what he went through. His letters and his journal describe the shoot-down, the interrogations, the capture, the trial, the emotional roller coaster ride he was going on while he was incarcerated in the Soviet Union. And it is a very unique perspective from his view while in prison.
Was there something whilst you were doing the research for this book, was there one of those moments which just made you stop in your tracks, a letter, a sentence, something you saw or discovered which was startling for you?
Yes, there was several. I'll talk to about two right now. One was a passage in his journal right after the sentencing of him to 10 years in prison. And he's reflecting now on this sentence. And in his book, in his journal, he writes something to the effect of he can never go to a zoo again, that he would want to be able to set all of the animals free. And at this time, he realizes how important freedom is because he's just lost his. And that was very profound. Another one that came to mind is in regards to the shoot-down sequence. And my father, sometime in November of 1960, so about 5 months after the shoot-down and about 2 or 3 months after the trial, he starts to keep a written record of his experiences in prison. His cellmate said, hey, Frank, why aren't you keeping a journal or a diary? And so he started to do this. And his first passage, when he's writing down his thoughts, he's trying to remember and recall everything that happened on the shoot down. And so he talks about being at altitude of 70,500 feet. He talks about the near miss of a Soviet SA-2 missile exploding near enough to the tail section to cause structural failure. He talks about what it was like to get trapped up into the cockpit and being banged around on the descent as he's falling out of the sky, and how he was able to free himself from the cockpit, get out of the airplane, parachute opens, and he parachutes to the ground. So all of this is vividly depicted and described in his written word. I have not edited these letters or the journal, so there are a few spelling mistakes still. I only wrote commentary around what he wrote.
Tell us how the release came about, because we were all, I suppose, at the time following the news, imagining the worst. He was going to be in prison for a long time, but actually he became a bargaining chip, didn't he?
That's correct. In the late 50s, America had caught a spy, Colonel Rudolph Abel, in New York City. And so the attorney for the spy, James Donovan, which was the centerpiece of the Spielberg movie that came out a few years ago, James Donovan negotiates behind the scenes with East Germany and the Soviet Union the exchange between my father and this Soviet spy. So on February 10th, 1962, a cold, dark, foggy morning, right out of a John Le Carré novel, you've got these two agents, espionage agents, on each side of the bridge, the Glenicker Bridge in Potsdam, Germany. They are positively ID'd, and they walked home to their respective freedoms. So it was a very unique experience for my father to go through, of course. And unfortunately, since he is being exchanged and he comes home, he doesn't write about that in his letters or his journal.
What was it like for your father adapting to life after this? Because for putting the fact that he was imprisoned and caught and became the focus of world attention, he actually had quite an active and dangerous job. So he was living on adrenaline all the time. Then this happened, and then suddenly, after his release, he was thrown back into civilian life. That's correct?
Yes, he was, and there was some adjustment to his homecoming. I mean, he would have some night frights on occasion, where he would wake up in the middle of the night with a profound sweat, thinking he was back in the Soviet prison cell. He'd look around, he'd get his bearings, and then he would go back to bed. And over time, those night frights subsided, and they eventually ended. I don't remember him ever having those when I was growing up. This happened within the first few years of his return home. But other than that one little thing where he would have these night frights, he was fine. He adapted to freedom again. He enjoyed coming home and seeing family and interacting with people, not being stuck in an 8-foot by 12-foot cell. But when he did come home, there was a lot of controversy at the time. You have to remember that this is the tail end of the 1950s, the beginning of the 1960s. The Red Scare, the Red Menace, McCarthy era has just happened. So the fear of communists and of spies in government and of defectors and traitors are in the forefront of Americans' minds. So several newspapers wrote stories about my father, how he defected, how he landed the plane, how he collaborated with the enemy, how he didn't follow orders, and other untruths. So this book that I've just written helps to set the record straight. And it's my dad's written account from him that cannot be disputed, since it's his writing, his thoughts and feelings of the time while he was incarcerated.
Just a couple more questions. You have devoted many years of your life to studying the Cold War, writing about the Cold War. Do you feel like now there is a resurgence of interest in this period of time, given the dynamics we have on the international stage with Russia and the United States and the relationship they're currently negotiating?
Yes, most definitely. Just because of the question you just asked, there's a resurgence in this time period. Because of Putin and Crimea, because of China and the South China Sea, because of the tensions that are starting to brew again and the saber-rattling that's happening, people are comparing this to a Cold War type of a scenario. Now, I don't believe there will ever be another Cold War like there was between the Soviets and the Americans. But I call this time period now Cold War 2.0. The same type of things will be occurring. There'll be intelligence gathering. There'll be saber battles. There'll be positioning of countries trying to look for what's best in their interest. That may not be in the best interest of America. So this tension, I think, will continue to build over time, but I don't think it's going to lead to a nuclear or a all-out war, per se. I think that wars will still be fought between surrogate countries backed by China, Russia, or America.
Letters from a Soviet Prison, the personal journal and correspondence of CIA U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers is out now. And how can we get hold of that? Is it on Amazon, usual places?
No, this is a private printing, limited to no more than 500 copies. It will be sold for the next year through my lectures and my venues, or by people writing to me at my address. And I'll be glad to give that to you on the air in just a moment. Mm-hmm. Once those 500 copies are sold out, I will then put an ISBN number on it and market it through Amazon and other retail outlets, but that will probably not be for 1 year from now.
Okay.
People would like to place an order. If people would like to place an order, they can contact me at the following address: Gary Powers, P.O. Box 1356, Midlothian, 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 Virginia 23113. They can also contact me by email at gpowersjr, GPOWERSJR, at coldwar.org, COLDWAR.org. And I'll be glad to ship them the book plus postage. The cost of the book is $25 plus postage.
That's fantastic.